Blues was always my favorite thing, but I never tricked myself into thinking I could actually make that kind of music, you know. I just couldn't, you know. I think it's possible to appreciate something like blues music or like R&B, you know, without trying to recreate it yourself.
Right.
And a lot of people don't realize that. A lot of people think I love the blues, so I'm going to play the blues, and then it's just not very interesting, you know. But that's a lot of the stuff that, like, my granddad would play gospel songs for a couple hours, and I would have to do the rhythm, you know, and I was so small, my hand was like, took everything I could do to reach around the guitar and play. But then he would set the guitar down. If I made it through that, he would play blues for me. And he would set the guitar down in his lap and tune it to an open tuning and play it with the back of his pocket knife. And that was my favorite. That was like my reward for making it through a couple hours of gospel standards and Grandpa Jones and, you know, old comedy country music and stuff. But that became my favorite thing. And then at one point, he took me to the local record store and bought like the complete recordings Robert Johnson box set that was out, and he took it home, and you know, he'd been a Pentecostal preacher, so he's a pretty conservative fella. So he took it home and overdubbed like the songs that were vulgar. You know, I was probably 10 years old when this happened, and gave me cassettes that he had made of all the other songs. Right. And then when I turned like 15, he gave me the original box. He said, "I think you're old enough for this part now." Wow. But I remember going to school and asking our music teacher about Robert Johnson. I was, you know, I was 9, 10 years old. And I was like, "What are you asking me?" You know, nobody had any clue what any of that stuff was. And my music teacher in like elementary and middle school was really cool. A guy named Michael Nix, and he taught in all the different schools around the area. You know, he would travel and drive and go teach for an hour here and an hour there. And he'd seen something like 300 Rolling Stones concerts. Rolling Stones, he was one of those people who just ate, you know, and breathed Rolling Stones. There's a lot of them out there. But he would call me out of class, you know, call me up to the principal's office, and I would think I was in trouble, and then I would get in there and he would have a mixtape that he'd made for me, or he would just want to sit there and talk about, you know, a current REM song that didn't make any sense, like Stand. I remember that was a big one. Like, you know, he asked us a question. He's like, "What song that's on the charts right now, you know, it just doesn't make any sense at all. The way he wrote it, he didn't mean for it to make any sense." And I said, I guessed Orange Crush, the REM song, because I didn't know anything about Agent Orange. I didn't know it was about the Vietnam War. I had no idea. I'd just seen it on like 21 Jump Street or something. And he said, "That's really close," but you know, then he called me out of class. He's like, "I'm going to explain to you why Stand doesn't make any sense." And he told me about that cut and paste, you know, the Burroughs style of writing that he used, some that Michael apparently Stipe used on that song. I don't know if it's true or not, but that was, you know, and I'm 10 years old. That's what was on the radio. So he was giving me a lot more insight, you know, and I just...
It's great that he took the time to do that.
He was really great. He did that for a whole lot of students, and he wound up with a really a big number of professional musicians that he'd had in his classes, you know, even though it was a small school district and there weren't many students. A lot of us wound up playing music professionally.